the Democratic side, as you know as well, here was a guy who was in some way implicated in an FBI investigation, would not explain that, in fact called anyone who questioned him racist for asking. One-term mayor of Tallahassee, 126th largest city in America, and running on a platform that was unapologetically left-wing. If he wins Florida, of course it has implications, as you noted, for the presidential race, but it also has much deeper implications for both parties. What does that mean exactly? How did that happen? I agree that DeSantis maybe wasn't the strongest candidate. Perhaps Adam Putnam might have won. But the fact is, if Gillum wins, that raises a lot of questions. And I would say that there are probably two answers. And it's the obvious. It's immigration and the economy. Immigration has changed Florida in a very recognizable way. The California of 30 years ago was solidly Republican, so was Florida. They now have different people living in them, and so they have different electoral results. That has kind of taken place beneath the notice, I would say, of most people paying attention. And the second is the economy, which is weaker in ways that we in Washington don't perceive. So the conventional measures of the economy are GDP and market performance, and both of them are great. But if you look at other indicators slightly beneath the surface, you see that there are a lot of poor people. For example, the single most common living arrangement for young people right now is with their parents. I don't think there's been a time after the Industrial Revolution when that's been true in this country. And that means that questions like health care are much more real than they have been even 3 cycles ago. I mean, Republicans won, what, 63, I think it was 63 seats in the 2010 midterm on the back of Obamacare, opposing Obamacare. Andrew Gillum, proposing universal health care, in effect, Medicaid for all, which he has, is written off, as most people in Washington, as a pipe dream and ludicrous, and I think as a mathematical question, it is ludicrous. There's no way to pay for that. But it definitely resonates with a state that's poorer than it looks. And so I think as Republicans think about how did this happen, how did someone who is not as impressive as you would imagine a governor of a major state would need to be, Andrew Gillum, how did he win, if indeed he does win? I think it's important to think through what's actually happening here. You know, it had nothing to do with Russia or Stormy Daniels. There's real stuff going on.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And he also, I think, has built a grassroots campaign from the beginning. He sort of arrived on the scene. A lot of people didn't know who he was. As you say, he's the mayor of, a relatively smaller city in the United States. But his appeal, I think that's also something that I'm kind of watching in terms of the trend of the evening. Charismatic, appealing candidates appear to be doing, fairly well. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Democrats recruited well, in other words.
Absolutely.
But they didn't. But I would argue in this case they didn't. I mean, I don't think if you had assembled a group of 20 Democratic political consultants in D.C. and said, draw your dream candidate, I don't think it would have been Gillum. I think they would have wanted someone who maybe looked like Gillum and had the manner of Gillum, but I don't think they would want someone with the hard left politics of Gillum. They thought he was going to lose. Again, I'm having talked to them. And so I think maybe the hard left economic issues are a little bit more popular than we want to think they are. I think that's ominous. But it doesn't make it any less true. So why is it that Beto O'Rourke, for example, I think will probably lose tonight, but he's coming a lot closer than he should be in the state of Texas? Again, 2 causes. Immigration has changed the demographics in Texas. And 2, some of this populist economic stuff is more popular, again, than we want to think it is.
Tucker, as always, thank you. We've got to make a call here.
Yep, the Fox News Decision Desk can now project that the incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, as expected, will win a 3rd term by defeating Republican Congressman Jim Renacci. This has always been, Sherrod Brown's race to lose, essentially, and he appears to be doing well tonight.
Yeah, he's going to win, and he calls himself a progressive populist. Following on what Tucker just talked about, bringing back Chris and Britt. You're looking, Britt, at these states, Florida, Ohio, Missouri, and automatically we start thinking about 2020 and how important they are in that picture.
Exactly, and Florida, of course, has been so pivotal in recent elections that having control of the state house is thought to be very helpful. I mean, a lot of people felt that if it hadn't been for Jeb Bush in the governor's chair in Florida in 2000, W might not have pulled it off down there. I want to mention one thing. I noticed that our needle on the Senate has begun to point more favorably toward the Republican control. I've been keeping track, as you know I do, of the betting odds.
We do know you do.
Which had the Republicans up in the 80% range. It's now up to 92% Republicans keep the Senate among the people who bet. House, meanwhile, which was up in the 60s for Democrats getting control of it, that's up to 78%. So people who are betting on this tonight have already pretty well seem to have decided where they think this is going.
We should also point out that Indiana looks like it is breaking a little bit Republican at this moment. It's still too early to make that call, but and we're waiting for Indianapolis, which is a huge area for Joe Donnelly. But it seems like there's a confidence building there. For
it's interesting because we always talked in the buildup, well, Trump has got this big advantage than the Republicans do because Democrats are holding and trying to defend 10 seats in states that Donald Trump won in 2016. What's interesting is that some of them were absolutely on the board, like Indiana, like Missouri, but some of them weren't. One of them was Ohio, a state that Trump won, but Sherrod Brown was always in a sizable lead, and there was never really a serious contest there. Same thing in Pennsylvania, a state that Trump won, but Bob Casey never really had any challenge there as well. So it does, again, Senate races are different than House races. I think people feel more of a connection, more of a history with the senators. But clearly some senators, despite the power of Donald Trump in those states, had an easy time winning re-election.
I mean, 5 of them, Democrats, were running for re-election in states that Trump won by 20 points or more. So that's an uphill battle to begin with.
Yeah. Just going back to Florida for a moment, you wonder when you look at someone like Andrew Gillum, who is such a progressive candidate. And we did the debate with Ron DeSantis and Adam Putnam, as you say, the Florida commissioner. And it was very clear that a lot of the people in Florida and a lot of people in leadership in Florida very much wanted him to be the candidate. But when it is someone like Andrew Gillum, if indeed he ends up pulling this out tonight, it's really close, as we can tell. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. 56% of the vote in, and this is a very tight race at this point. But he's, he may be one of those candidates that has just such unique characteristics that he's pulling in voters who haven't voted in a long time.
Look, I've seen him. I disagree with much of what he says, but I think he's a very attractive guy. I mean, I think he's an appealing guy, and he's disarming in his manner and so forth. And, in a tight situation, that counts for a lot.
All right, many polls are closed, as we mentioned. Ballots still being counted. Plus, will Republicans keep control of the House? That is in question. And it's really going to be decided in probably the next few hours as we count down to the next poll closings. And as we go to break, some other races, we have some calls to make. You can see these being made as we head to break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to America's election headquarters. We're looking at some House races. We've been talking about them, the early ones. There are some tight races, especially Kentucky 6 has turned around now. Incumbent Republican Andy Barr, 3-term incumbent, now up in that race with 84% in over Amy McGrath, a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, one of the first fighter pilots, female fighter pilots. Let's look at the Virginia races. Congressional District 2, Scott Taylor, that's 63% in, slight lead. 7, the 7th congressional district. This is Dave Bratt, the incumbent. Remember, he was the giant killer who in the primary took down the House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor. He is slightly ahead of the Democrat there, Spanberger. But this could be the first flip of the night. We may be ready for a call, and that is Virginia 10. And that is the Democrat Jennifer Wexton, who's a state senator, up big with 67% over Republican incumbent Barbara Comstock, who is a really good retail campaigner. She was in a district that kind of shifted, as I mentioned before, to a little bit more bluish purple. So she was facing an uphill battle. But those early states, the Kentucky 6 is turning around with 84% in. We're watching those. Let's head upstairs to Bill Hemmer with Martha. at the data.
Hello there. We are up here on the terrace now, taking a look at what Bill has on the billboard for us right now.
Yeah, we got a lot to show, too.
Yeah,
Brett, you're just talking about a lot of these races right now. You're talking about the Kentucky race, a few in Virginia. Why don't we just go ahead and dial in on these House races now? This is something that's got a lot of attention right now in Kentucky 6. And, Martha, you've been watching this as well. Look, Andy Barr has a slight lead. If he keeps it close or even wins, it's really good news for Republicans. Heavily Democratic district. She's a first-time candidate, but right now with 85% of the vote in, it looks good for the Republicans. Let's see where the rest of the votes come in there in Kentucky 6. We put a lot of focus on Virginia, and for good reason. Brett, you mentioned it a moment ago. In Virginia 10, it looks like Barbara Comstock will lose her bid for a re-election there in a tough battle with Jennifer Wexton. That's a changing district in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
However, if we pop down here to the southern part of the state, this is good news for Denver Riggleman right now. He's got about a 7-point advantage right now against the Democratic challenger, and you mentioned Virginia 7 as well. Brett, you said he's the giant killer. Right now, about 20% of the vote is still outstanding, but he's hanging on right there.
Dave Bratt unseated Eric Cantor, Tea Party candidate, one of the early people in that wave, and now he's trying to hold on to his own seat, so we'll see where that goes.
I'll tell you a couple of races in Ohio that I find fascinating. I'll take you in right now in Ohio. Remember 3 months ago when the eyes of the political world were focused on Ohio District 12? Martha, this is Columbus. Yeah. It's suburban. It goes out to a rural area. It's a developing part of America that seems to be growing every year. The Democrat, Danny O'Connor, is now beating Troy Balderson by about 6 points. Got a lot of votes to come in right now. Total vote difference is 7,000, but you had about 200,000 3 months ago in August when they had that special election. So we got a ways to go, but right now it looks decent for the Democrat. Here's why I think this race is so important now. See what President Trump did 2 years ago? In this very district, he won it by 12 points. Now, you think about who these voters are, and the census data will tell you these are people who live above the national average by $10,000 a household. They've got about 70% have a college education or better. And look at the race, 85% white. These are white, suburban Americans, well-educated, who have done very well under this economy over the past 2 years. And right now, they appear to be turning against the Republicans.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of area where you're looking at those white, college-educated women, in many cases, that the president perhaps has felt slipping away a little bit. He's talked a lot in recent advertising and appearances in the rallies about how much security matters to women in America, trying to sell them on the issue of the wall, trying to sell them that the caravan is a scary thing. And those are exactly the kind of areas that he was working to hold on to.
And a lot of examples all across the country we're going to watch throughout the night, especially the suburbs of Chicago. Take you down to Florida real quick here. Just this is I-4 corridor. We always think about this during national elections, and yet being in a midterm right now, this is Tampa, it's Orlando, it's Daytona Beach. Right now, the Republicans hanging on with a good percentage of vote on there. Florida 16 down around Sarasota. Again, with 90% of the vote counted, Republicans are hanging on there as well. So you're seeing some bright spots for the GOP. Then you see some spots of concern. And you think about that 23 vote margin in the House right now. And we're going to be going through this as the night goes on, and we'll see whether or not. It raises
a lot of questions about whether there's a blue wave, red wave, or whether there's not really a wave, whether we see a lot of splits in these areas like Ohio and Florida. And we were just talking about how you could potentially see a split between the governor's race and the Senate race in Florida, which leaves you with something looking a lot like Florida, right?
And a hanging chad. Thank you, Martha.
All right, we'll send it back down to you guys.
Remember that. Tallahassee, 40 days and 40 nights. Listen, Florida is really a key battleground, no matter how you look at it. The governor's race in the Sunshine State, Tallahassee mayors, we talked about Democrat Andrew Gillum facing off against Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis. Phil Keating is live at the Gillum headquarters in Tallahassee. Phil, what's the mood down there?
The mood here is jubilant for two reasons. Number one, a deluge, and I mean deluge of rain about 2 hours ago finally passed. There were power outages, there was lightning, there was thunder, and the media had to evacuate the press tent to an indoor building there for a time. But everyone's back out. The rain has stopped. This is the crowd, mostly young people down here below in front of the stage. It's pretty full at this point. They're all enthusiastic. They're hoping this watch party turns into a historic historic celebratory party for the Democratic Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum. No Democrat has won the governor's race in Florida in 20 years, and if he does win, he'll become the first black governor ever in the state of Florida. His opponents, former three-term Congressman Ron DeSantis, who is an absolute Trump supporter through and through, supports every policy of the president and was endorsed by the president early in the primary campaign. And he's been invited on stage with the president 3 times at big rallies, with the president trying to use his popularity amongst the Florida Republican base to really push DeSantis ahead in this race, most recently Saturday night in Pensacola. Again, the rains have stopped. That's a positive thing. The last 2 gubernatorial races, as well as the last 2 presidential races in the state of Florida, have been decided by just 1 point, 1 percentage point. This is a big swing state. It's a toss-up state, and that is why it is very evenly divided. And the statewide races tend to prove just that much as well. So still early in the race, but we are getting reports down in South Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach counties, huge Democratic strongholds with big percentages of people. And they're showing that there have been waits at the voting polls up to an hour. Brett.
Okay, Phil, thanks. Tell them to change the channel down there. We've got a couple calls to make. On the House side, the Associated Press is calling the race in Florida 27 for Donna Shalala. You may remember she's the former Health and Human Services Secretary for President Clinton, former University of Miami president. This was a tight race against Maria Salazar, a Cuban-American journalist. Shalala, not considered the best campaigner there, and it was really tight throughout. This is a gain for the House Democrats. So now you have +2 for the Democrats as they need to get +23. Also, Florida 6, we are calling for, the Associated Press calling for Mike Waltz, former Special Forces commander. He's a Republican, defeating Nancy Soderberg, the Democrat. The Democrats spent a lot of money on that race. Mike Waltz pulling that out in Florida 6.
Yeah, he was in a tight race. I mean, they had a tough time of it. There was a lot of negative advertising, as we see in a lot of these races going back and forth. Soderberg was a UN representative, alternate representative in the Obama administration, very active in foreign policy in Democratic circles. So that's a pickup, a win for Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz.
Guess what? The night's just starting. We have a lot of race calls that are still pending. Take a look at that. All the white has not been called yet. And we have a lot of races that could be called in just a matter of minutes. You want to keep it here on America's election headquarters. Our polls have just closed, and Fox News can project that incumbent Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson will defeat his Democratic challenger, Jared Henderson. We're also making a call in that Virginia race. Barbara Comstock, the incumbent, will go down to Democrat challenger Jennifer Wexton. This is a gain for the Democrats, so now they are up to +3, I believe, is what they need, 23 net gain to take over control of the House of Representatives.
So let's take a look at the balance of power. As we said, a lot of white cubes still up there as we go through the 435 races that we are watching tonight. A handful of those are toss-up races. As you can see, 2 pickups right now for the Democrats. They need to have 23.
3 with Virginia, 10.
3 with Virginia, which has just come in. 3 pickups for the Democrats and Republicans stat at the moment.
Joining us now, House Majority Whip, Louisiana Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. Congressman, thanks for being here. Your thoughts early in the night and whether you can retain control.
Well, we know what's at stake. It's been a battle from the very beginning. I've been in touch with a lot of our members in vulnerable districts, and they're seeing very high turnout in our side. Surely on the Democrat side, we always knew they were going to have high turnout, but to see our side showing up in large numbers too, that tells you that we're battling, and I think in a lot of these swing districts that Pelosi would need to get the majority, we're going to be able to hold on to them. So we've always said it's going to be a late night, a lot of close races, but again, we know where the battlegrounds are, and so far no surprises.
Steve, Martha McCallum here. You know, when you take a look at some of the fundamentals of what voters are talking about, they seem to be very interested in health care. Interested in the economy and immigration, but their numbers are a little bit lower for the president on the issue of immigration, on the issue of health care, and they're very positive on the president when it comes to the economy. How do you see this playing out for you in these House races?
The economy has still been the top issue, and You know, obviously there are other problems with health care. We've seen under Obamacare, you're still seeing double-digit increases in many states in premiums because Obamacare is just not working, and we need to keep working on an answer to Obamacare. It's just a failed law, and there's a much better way to lower premiums and protect people with pre-existing conditions. We've been for that every step of the way. On the economy, look, you can't go anywhere without hearing people say how great the economy is going. Families talking about how they have more wages, more money in their paycheck. And Pelosi wants to reverse the tax cuts, so clearly that's been a big issue and a big talking point in terms of people that are concerned about Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker again.
Andy Barr pull it out in Kentucky 6?
I was just with Andy Friday, and he's been battling. You know, I think he's got a real good chance of winning because he's much more in tune with that district and in line with that district. I mean, his opponent, Amy McGrath, says she wants to be the most liberal, progressive person in the state of Kentucky. Kentucky is not a far-left Pelosi-type state, and hopefully Andy pulls it out in Lexington.
50.3% to 48.5%, 88% in. You know, Congressman, were you upset about the focus in the last days of the campaign, kind of shifting more to immigration, or did you believe that the closing argument should have been more economy?
Well, the economy's been a selling point from the beginning. Immigration popped up because you saw this caravan coming in. And, you know, and frankly, in a lot of swing districts I've been into, regardless of where they stand on a lot of the complex points in immigration, you know, and I want to see us build the wall. I want border security. But the idea that with millions of people waiting in line to come to this country legally, you have thousands of people just saying we're going to ignore all of those laws and storm right in front of all those other people that are waiting in line to come here. That's not the way to come to America. We're a very generous nation on immigration, and we need strong border security, just like every other country secures their border. So, you know, national security became an important issue. But in the end, the economy still has been something that everybody talks about when there are more job openings than there are people looking for work.
What about the tax reform bill and how it was sold to the American public? Because it feels like a lot of people feel that it didn't work for them, even though the economy seems to have been stimulated by it in so many ways. Has that message been presented in a powerful enough way? And is that reflected at all in what we're seeing tonight?
Well, you know, in most places I went, people actually liked the idea that they had more money in their pockets, and they recognized it. I mean, the bonuses and pay raises that companies, large and small, were giving to their employees are resulting in higher wages. And you just saw the numbers. I mean, numbers keep coming out that wages are going up because of the tax cut bill. And Pelosi said she wants to take it away. She called it crumbs, and then she says she wants to take those tax cuts away. I don't think people are going to want to let that go. I think they want to see us keep building on the economic success that we're having with President Trump.
Congressman Scalise, we appreciate your time. We'll follow up and see how it turns out tonight. We're watching every race.
Thank you, Congressman.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, let's go back, if we can, to that Florida governor's race and put up the screen. This obviously is a key race. Andrew Gillum is the Tallahassee mayor against Ron DeSantis, congressman, and now this is a very, very tight race, although it has shifted in the past hour or so. We have Ron DeSantis with 50 straight up and Andrew Gillum at 48.8. Britt, what are you looking at there?
Well, the question is how much is in, and
93%.
93%.
That's probably 93% of precincts. Right?
Yeah, so Broward County is in, we're told.
Right.
So 93%.
That looks a lot better for DeSantis than it did a little while ago.
The Panhandle is a late
late
return.
Late return, right.
So it should be coming in.
Panhandle will almost certainly help DeSantis.
DeSantis,
Republican, yeah. So that he might pull that out. It'd be a great relief to Mr. Trump, I would think.
I was going to say, and then you'll take back everything you said about Donald Trump. And
about how Donald Trump shouldn't have supported him.
Chris, I said if he lost,
it would be bad news.
Now, if he wins, maybe we'll consider Trump even more of a genius than I know you already do, Chris.
93% is expected vote percentage, not the precincts in, but a lot of big areas have come in that race. We have our other panel right here, Laura, Juan, Dana, and Guy. Laura, what are you looking at in Florida?
Well, I have to say, if DeSantis, who is a Trump guy, if he manages to pull out this victory with what was thrown at him in the last just 2 weeks, millions of dollars from Act Blue, the big Democrat turnout machine, which has done a great job of registering people to vote for the Democrat Party. They threw in millions. Steyer threw in millions. Other groups threw in millions. This was the most expensive governor's race in the country in Florida. If he squeaks out a victory here, I got to say it's all Donald Trump who won this for him. Ron DeSantis, I think he could have run a better campaign. And, you know, I always take it from my radio audience. I mean, he was an okay guest, but I think he could have taken it up a notch. Gillum is charismatic. He's a storyteller, getting back to stories. I think Britt was exactly right about him. For Floridians in the end. Again, this is a slight victory, though. This is, and it's, you know, he wins, he wins. If he wins, if he wins, it will be a small margin. But nevertheless, a win is a win. And you got to say Donald Trump had to have put him over the edge.
You know, Juan, I just have one thing that after the Hurricane Michael, there was a lot of talk about whether that would affect the turnout. And after Hurricane Maria, there was a lot of talk about Puerto Ricans coming from Puerto Rico to Florida, 280,000 plus. And they could register to vote right away. They're obviously American citizens.
You guys all usually are.
It seems like, just looking at the data from Florida, that was not a huge factor when it came to Republican Democrat. The conventional wisdom was that the Puerto Rican, because of how the hurricane recovery was going to go, would possibly vote Democrat. But they aligned some ways with Republicans.
Well, we don't know for sure yet, but I mean, if you look at that whole I-95 corridor, especially the area around Orlando, you saw a tremendous surge in terms of the Puerto Rican population after the big storms that you mentioned. And there was great, I think, somewhat concern about whether or not that would change the state's politics in a very telling way. I would also say it was compounded by the second hurricane that hit the Panhandle hard, and the question was whether or not that would interfere with people getting out to vote. But what we've seen, and repeatedly, visits by President Trump to stir his base in Florida, to make this a race about Donald Trump. DeSantis is basically a stand-in for Donald Trump in this race. The only question that I think people have here is twofold. One is whether the Latino vote, and oftentimes the Cuban vote, goes Republican. The question is, what about the rest of them, and especially participation? Did they turn out, or did they simply not vote? And the other issue is, of course, you have a black candidate running for governor. How many people said they would vote for him, but actually didn't?
Yeah, and race was a big issue in this race that we watched between Gillum and DeSantis. You know, you remember DeSantis said, you don't want to monkey up this economy. And you and I had a big conversation about that that night. You know, a lot of people saw it as an innocent comment. He's sort of mixing two ideas, mess it up or monkey with it or whatever. And it continued to be an issue that Gillum in the debates in particular really tried to hit him hard with.
Well, he said, it's not that I'm calling him racist, it's that racists think he's racist. But what you saw even in the closing days of this race was that you had people using racially charged language. And the question is, how does race impact this contest? Because all the numbers had seemed to indicate that Gillum was in the lead, and yet we're looking right now, and it looks too close to call.
They're getting ready, we're told, for possible recounts down there. 86,000 separate the two in the race.
In Florida, a recount?
Imagine that. Imagine that. Hanging chads, here we come.
Betting odds have shifted dramatically for DeSantis in just the recent while. Betting odds now have it almost 2-to-1 almost for DeSantis. So 62-34 is a
I expect you to have a visor.
And maybe a big cigar.
Yeah, and garters on my sleeve.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And a bulldog.
Suspenders, right?
There you go. We've got to take a break.
Sunglasses.
As we count down to the next poll closings at the top of the hour.
What role, if any, did the economy play in voters' decisions? It appears that it plays a big role, but people seem to think it cuts both ways. Maria Bartiromo joins us on that, coming up next. Some new numbers from our Fox News voter analysis. Here's what it's telling us about the top issues with voters. Check out this map. The darkest purple identifies states with the highest percentage of voters saying that the top issue facing the country is the economy and jobs. Wyoming has the most choosing the economy at 29%. Minnesota has the fewest, saying the economy is the most important issue overall. 19% say that the economy is the top issue facing the country. Joining us now is Maria Bartiromo, anchor of Mornings with Maria on Fox Business Network and Sunday Morning Features here on the Fox News Channel. Maria, it's really interesting to discuss this whole issue of how much the economy and the growth that we've seen is compelling voters one way or the other tonight.
I think you're right, and I think that is what is compelling voters. We've had this debate over the last 6 weeks, 3 months about health care versus the economy. At the end of the day, it is, am I feeling better today than I was 2 years ago? And that really is what we're seeing play out tonight. You look at something like Kentucky, where manufacturing is the largest generator of economic activity there, and we've seen manufacturing jobs come back in the last 2 years. An unemployment rate on a national level at record lows, 3.7%, and earnings, corporate sector earnings, up 22% quarter after quarter. One of the most important economic policies from the Republicans and the Trump administration has been the rolling back of regulations. When you look at what could happen if the Dems take control of Congress and Maxine Waters running financial services, Gerald Nadler running judiciary, you see a push away from that, away from rolling back regulations and perhaps putting more of the clamps on business, and that would certainly reverse what we've seen in the last 2 years.
I want to interrupt you for a second. Associated Press calling Kentucky 6 for incumbent Andy Barr, so he will become a fourth-term incumbent. We are putting the check mark next to Andy Barr. That is a huge, huge development in the early races. Again, as we were talking early on, this was a bellwether, and Amy McGrath ran a great race, but she will go down to Andy Barr, who pulls this out in Kentucky, which is a huge deal. And I want to update the other toss-up states that we're looking at with Claire McCaskill in Missouri. That's early. We are looking, though, very closely at Indiana, 49% in. And you see Mike Braun starting to separate there. 53.8% to Joe Donnelly's 42%. We're saying it's too close to call, but Republicans there in Indiana are feeling confident about Mike Braun. He's a businessman, Maria. He ran essentially saying we need more people like President Trump to talk business to Washington.
That's right. And that is why that rolling back of regulations really resonates there, as well as the fact that there's smaller government and lower taxes. Look, in the 10 years prior to the Trump administration, businesses were sitting on their cash. They weren't sure what regulation was coming around the pike. I mean, they didn't know if they were going to face higher fees, higher needs for lawyers, for compliance officers because of the regulatory environment. That changed, and it has changed in the last 2 years. That's why you're seeing capital spending increases up on the part of business. Capital expenditures are up. These are some of the metrics that you want to look at in terms of where the business community stands. In Kentucky, you were talking about one of the worst economies in the entire country. And now you've seen manufacturing growth. Trade, obviously a big issue, particularly with the president's stance on tariffs. We'll see how that plays out in Kentucky. But I think this is a vote from the people on economic policies that they want to see continue.
We know that Braun has really been driving up the rural vote in Indiana, and they're still waiting for some of the Indianapolis vote to come in, which obviously would be a better area for Joe Donnelly. But we watch these candidates who have been paying attention to the areas that the president paid attention to in Pennsylvania, in Indiana, in Wisconsin, some of which we're obviously still waiting to come in for. But he paid attention to them, and these candidates are also driving up the vote in those areas.
Absolutely. And President Trump going out 3 rallies yesterday, 2 the day before, 2 the day before that. He is working hard because he knows what's at stake for his own administration, his own, in the next 2 years. You're either going to see a further of his economic policies or investigation after investigation after investigation.
Maria, thank you. I remember 2 years ago, you were at that desk over there. It was 3 in the morning. President Trump had been declared the president, and the market futures went down 800 points. And you said, that seems like a buy to me because of regulations, taxes. If people had listened to you, they could be a lot richer.
A lot of them did, and they made a lot of money, I think.
No, I saw just the economic policies that was driving my, my thinking that night. And when you talk about rolling back regulations, lower taxes, small government, that will drive business. That will encourage business to create jobs. That's why I said to you, I guess, the next morning, you got to buy this with both hands.
Yeah, but Paul Krugman said the market was going to completely collapse, that it would fall apart and cease to exist.
And I said not.
No.
Thank you.
You were right. As usual, Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stick around.
Maria. Chris Stirewalt is our Fox News politics editor. We've gathered him out of the decision desk area and pulled him out. Chris, we want to talk Florida.
Okay.
We want to talk Florida first, and that is the governor's race down there that has Ron DeSantis up. It looks like Scott is performing better, too, than even President Trump did in Miami-Dade County.
Well, there is that, and he ought to be expected to, just based on the fact that he was governor and the way that the midterm electorate looks. But there is still a lot of football to be played down there. We're watching it very closely. We're babysitting. It's obviously one of the most important discussions we're having, but it's just too soon for us to say. These are both very close races, and they're both close races in places where Democrats felt like they had an advantage. So that's an area of concern for them. They were not, I wouldn't say counting on Nelson holding on for sure, but they had strong feelings about it. They felt like it was going to be okay. And the very fact that we're going to have to worry this, we're going to be talking about Florida long after my normal bedtime, I'm sure.
59,000 separating Scott and Nelson, 93% in. Where's the rest of the 7%?
Well, I've been waiting to talk to you for a minute, so I don't feel entirely comfortable saying exactly where the vote is coming in. But 7% out of that many millions of votes is a lot of votes.
Panhandle, perhaps, is
Tucker,
still
good to have you with us.
outlying. Usually that's a later part to come in Florida. But, Chris, you know, when you look at the closeness of this race at this point, and you talk about Rick Scott, who has been trying to convince people there that as governor, he's always watched out for them in the hurricanes. The president has tweeted saying, you know, Rick Scott calls me all the time about what's going on in Florida and how I can help the people there. He says, Bill Nelson's never called me once. These are both people, you know, in both of these two different races that Floridians are extremely familiar with.
They are. And also, we know that from Rick Scott's...
Tonight, we are just hours from the 2018 midterm elections, as you well know, and the noise levels are becoming almost unbearable. Suddenly, everybody posturing and trying to scare and bully you into voting for this or that candidate. It's all very loud. But pause for a second and consider what you are not hearing, what is missing from this cacophony. Whatever happened to that? And while we're at it, how about Brett Kavanaugh? Does that name ring a bell? What about his high school yearbook and his purported teenage drinking problem and all those gang rapes he supposedly committed? What about those? Those were the biggest stories in the world not so long ago, 24/7 on the other cable channels. Those stories were going to define this election. They were going to define this entire historical era. Everybody on television told us that. And now they are just fading memories. It turns out they were sideshows. The midterm elections were never going to be fought over Vladimir Putin or Brett Kavanaugh or just about anything else we spend most of our time talking about. This election, like all elections, was always going to turn on issues that actually affect the life of the country. This year, there are three big issues: immigration, the economy, and nationalism. The first is the most obvious. Immigration determines who lives next door to you. It determines who works in your office, who chooses your leaders. There is nothing more fundamental in any country than the question of citizenship. Whatever Donald Trump doesn't know, he definitely knows this. He's been talking about immigration for 3 years now. For all of that time, official Washington has been trying to make him stop.
The way Donald Trump has been conducting this campaign, attacking brown people, making up stories about, you know, possibly George Soros funding caravans that are still, 800 miles away to try to scare white voters.
In other words, shut up, racist. But Trump will not shut up. So they have changed tactics. The new line is, immigration doesn't really matter. The threat is hyped. Only dumb people and bigots care about borders. By the way, parties of both sides seem to believe this. Paul Ryan's office let it be known to Politico this morning that the Speaker of the House begged the president last night to stop yammering about this caravan from Central America and start talking about something important like Paul Ryan's tax bill. That's preemptive blame shifting, obviously. If Republicans lose tomorrow, Paul Ryan can point the finger at Trump rather than accept responsibility for not funding the wall that voters said they wanted. But it's also a ludicrous position to take because it's untrue. Immigration does matter. If, for example, Arizona and Texas Go to the Democrats tomorrow. Immigration will be the reason. Those were Republican states until the population changed. So no matter how much you lie about it, immigration is inherently important, and voters understand that. If you want people to stop worrying about the border, maybe you should secure the border. Then it won't be an issue. But people are also worried about other things that Washington doesn't notice or think is important. Here in Washington, the economy is synonymous with the stock market. Markets have boomed for 10 years. There are entire cable channels devoted to chronicling that boom. Here in Washington, the assumption is that the economy must also be booming. But the truth is that after a decade of stocks going higher, the effects, the positive ones, are still not very obvious outside select zip codes on the coasts. In Middle America, many young people understand that they will almost certainly make less than their parents made. That is a reversal of the American dream. They know they won't be able to buy cars or houses. They're not getting married. They're not having kids. Our current economic system makes it more difficult than ever for families to form. Our middle class is becoming unable to reproduce itself. Washington should be absolutely panicked about this. It is the most basic sign of failure, their failure. But nobody in either party seems to care. Their answer is just to import new families from other countries. So maybe it's not so surprising that young people say they like socialism, because what we have now is not working for them. And unless we fix it, we may get actual socialism, which will be a disaster. And that leads to the third issue of this election, which is nationalism. Now, despite what you are hearing day in and day out, nationalism is not a racial category. It has nothing to do with race or ethnicity. Nationalism is the belief that leaders ought to put the interests of their own countries above those of other countries. It's very straightforward. The president himself declared himself a nationalist the other night. Watch.
They have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
Trump's a nationalist. So in normal times, the president of the United States announcing that his main goal is protecting the United States would not qualify as news, because until about 10 minutes ago, every leader of every nation state throughout history has been a nationalist, almost by definition. Franklin Roosevelt was a nationalist. So was Abraham Lincoln. So was Mahatma Gandhi. So was Nelson Mandela. Nationalism has always been the rule. And why wouldn't it be? And yet suddenly it's an abomination.
Nationalist. Use that word. We're going to talk about that word tonight. It is a favorite of the alt-right and is loaded with nativist and racial undertones. And globalists, well, globalists have been used as a slur of sorts, sometimes even against those in the administration, often with anti-Semitic overtones, which has happened to make the president come right out and embrace nationalism openly and claim that mantle. What has happened here?
What are you trying to say as President of the United States, that you're a nationalist? Americans know what that means. It's not even a dog whistle anymore. It's a bullhorn.
Dumb people repeating the same talking points. So the message is nationalism is now profanity, the word itself. Twitter and Facebook will surely be banning the term if they haven't already. But why? What exactly is going on here? Why are they so intent on stamping out not just the concept, but the very word? It's simple. What you're watching is people protecting their own prerogatives. Globalization, which is the opposite of nationalism, has caused an enormous transfer of wealth from the American middle class to what we used to call the third world, to other countries. American factories closed, but the jobs didn't go away. They just went to other countries. Now, some Americans got very rich from this. Many others got poorer. That's what happened. Rather than admit what actually happened, though, the people who got richer are trying to make the people who got poorer shut up and stop complaining about it. A borderless world has been hugely profitable for them. That's why they support it. Nationalism is their kryptonite, so they must stop it. So they scream racism and hope that nationalism will go away. Will it go away? Probably not. Because the core idea is appealing to people in all countries over all time. People want leaders who are, above all, on their side. They always have wanted that. They always will want that. That's what we know. What we don't know is what's going to happen in the elections tomorrow. We won't even guess. Nothing would surprise us. But we know what the real issues are because it's obvious. And we're going to spend the next hour talking about those issues. We're going to begin tonight on immigration with Ann Coulter. She's the author of Resistance is Futile, How the Trump-Hating Left Lost Its Collective Mind. Ann Coulter joins us tonight. Ann, thanks a lot for coming on.
Sure.
So you saw this piece in Politico today, not that you're cruising Politico, I'm sure, but it kind of stuck out. And in it, a background source informed Politico that Paul Ryan has been trying to stop Trump from talking about immigration because it's irrelevant, it's a peripheral issue. What he really ought to be talking about is Paul Ryan's great success with the tax bill that became law. If this isn't preemptive butt covering, I'm not sure what is.
Beyond that, it's just so completely wrong. I'm so happy Trump has taken over my party. No, that's the old loser Democratic, or rather Republican Party, running on tax cuts. I mean, half the country doesn't even pay taxes. You know that running on the economy is a loser because, for one thing, all of the left-wing commentators are saying Trump should be talking about the economy. Please talk about the economy. Don't talk about immigration. Number two, the only argument from their side that you just played, I guess, from Joe Scarborough, was to accuse people who are opposed to dumping millions of poor people on the country, driving down the wages of the working class and Joe Scarborough's maid.